Okay, so we're coming at our Chevrusa in a different style this week.
We're starting.
Yeah, we're recording.
No, yeah, we've been recording the whole time.
No, we haven't been recording the whole time. Just when you were like, "Oh, I'm alien. I'm uncomfortable yet."
I'm still trying to figure out what this mic is.
It goes
You want
near
to
your
start?
mouth.
You want to start?
No, I don't have to start. You can start.
I just
No, it's the chair that's squeaking.
okay.
Please, bechavod.
It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back.
Yeah, I assume this is going to be a reoccurring thing.
Bezrat
Time
Hashem.
and time again.
Bezrat Hashem.
Over the years, we've always been trying to sit down and learn, and we finally found, a way to do so.
Yeah, and also like personally, I've found a way to learn.
Right.
You know,
and spread.
But that so far has been consistent. So
It's great. So you said you wanted to learn Gemara. You
yeah,
want to do some Gemara, get involved in it, talk a little bit about the background maybe, and just see the back and forth and what's going on when two people sit down in a base medrash and go at it in a piece of Gemara.
well, yeah, Gemara was the thing that I like. When I first got to yeshiva, I sat down in the base midrash, the learning hall, and someone was talking about if the tip of a lulav, if it was split, or if it was wet or not, or dry, something of this sort.
Dry and split.
If it made it puzzle, if it made it non-viable, I guess you could say. Invalid. And I didn't know why, but it sparked my curiosity, and I was like, I don't know why I care if this matters, but I care. But I feel like it matters. But there's something that hooked me.
Right. No, it is interesting that the Gemara in general, the halacha, the Torah spans all areas of life. Everything is taken into account, discussed, figured out exactly how we're supposed to live our lives according to the Torah. There's like countless halachas about bathroom stuff. Like making a bracha. Not most people know okay, you're not supposed to make a bracha in the bathroom, but like if you could see our bathrooms are different than they used to be. Like they used to just have a hole in the ground. You could see into this outhouse. You could see there's dog feces on the ground. You could there's a bedpan in the room. You're in the hospital, let's say, and you happen to pass by a room and there's a bedpan. Are you allowed to make a bracha in front of that? And you would think this is so nitty gritty and weird to be talking about. For some reason, I love that. I specifically those halachas. I remember when I learned them, I was so excited about it.
Well, it seems these discussions that you wouldn't necessarily think about on a regular daily basis, but when you learn them, it's like, oh, I would have never thought about that. It kind of makes sense.
Right.
What I do have a question for you. What is something about Gemara or learning Gemara that you think people either get wrong or don't really fully understand when it comes to learning Gemara?
That's a very wide-ranging question because there's so many different types of people. Based on the levels, if I'm talking to a guy who knows how to learn well, he's at a decent level in his learning. He knows how to translate. He knows more or less how the Gemara works. I might say there's certain skills or certain experience that you pick up how the Gemara works. Some people, the problem is sometimes that they're not willing to hear what the Gemara has to say. They want to say their own piece. They want to just have their own creativity, and they don't want to kind of subjugate themselves to what it says here. Those are just two examples off the top of my head. So I would say it's case dependent. Some people, I'll tell you a story. We love stories, right?
We love stories.
Yeah. So, one thing that you see in the Gemara a lot is that it will bring, let's say a machlokas, an argument, discussion, 2, 3, 4 different opinions in one source. And then it will bring another source, what we call a brisa. So I'm just going to get a few terminologies out there just so that we're on the same page with the viewers and ourselves.
Can you give me 1 second?
Yes. So just some background, some terminology that we'll be using. So we're talking about learning Gemara. Gemara is obviously based on the Mishnah. Now, so the Mishnah and the Gemara together make up a large portion of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. The Mishnah itself were teachings that were passed down through certain schools of Rebbeim, of Tanoim, what we call Tanoim, people who were authors of the Mishnah. That's what they're called. Their time period is called the Tanaic period, Tanoim. So they for the most part were teaching these teachings. We'll call it for a second. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi came along, and he took all the what he considered the main teachings that incorporate all the laws of the oral law that's needed for a person to know in order to know what to take out of the Torah and to know whether it's a Torah law or a D'Rabbanan, a rabbinical law, and he put them all into the Mishnayos, which are made up of like 4,900 Mishnayos, give or take. Right, there's a lot of them. And those are like the main teachings which the Gemara goes off of. Usually you start with a Mishnah, and you go through a Gemara, and it's usually either relevant to what something the Mishnah says, or sometimes it feels like a bit more of a side point, but still, meaning not discussing like the main focus of the Mishnah, but it will bring up a halacha that at first glance you'll scratch your head and be like, hold on a second, we're talking about X in the Mishnah, now you're bringing up Y, and then like a few steps later, the Gemara will ask a question based on something our Mishnah says on this random, seemingly out, halacha that doesn't have relevance to what we're learning, and you'll see how it becomes connected. So most of the Gemara is going off of these Mishnayos, and then so the Mishnah is like the main source of the oral law. Again, not much is explained in the Mishnah. It's just one after the other, another law, and machlokasim.
So the Gemara is coming
as well.
So the Gemara is coming to like explain
Yeah.
the Mishnah.
Yeah, sometimes like Mishnah is great to learn, to pick up a lot of ideas, to gain a lot of knowledge. It's very beneficial for a person to sit down and learn Mishnah. Theoretically, not so theoretically, but it's not so much done this way nowadays. But Pirkei Avos says that first a person should learn basically Tanakh, and then he should learn Mishnah. It gives certain ages, and then after that he should learn Gemara. Meaning you should have all the background before you start learning Gemara. We don't do that, but it is for sure.
Do you think that's been a hindrance, the fact that we don't do that anymore?
Yes and no. First of all, it depends on how the person thinks. Some people don't need it as much. Theoretically, if you learn Gemara and you learn it well, you'll find all the necessary pieces that you need to understand it. You'll find that the Gemara is giving you, or the commentaries are telling you, filling in those, so to speak, gaps that you might feel you're not really getting the full picture. So they'll fill you in on something you need to know. Sometimes you'll get up in the middle of learning a piece of Gemara, grab another sefer off the shelf, maybe a Mishnah or a Chumash, and look something up and be like, hey, where's this coming from? To get your background. Some people, it very much helps to have all that background coming in. It is partially going to be important how you think, how much you need it, but it's for sure beneficial for everyone to have that background. Is it crucial? Like you can't learn without it? No. And certain things might be lacking. At some point, a person should, and is meant to try to cover all these things, learning the Mishnayos, to just see the information. So when he comes into this, he's not completely groping around in the dark. Like it's going to throw all sorts of ideas at you from all over the place, and you're like, I just don't know what any of this stuff is. So it is beneficial to have that. Now, besides the Mishnah, what we have what the Gemara what we call a brisa. So a brisa is also written by a Tana, came from the same time period. Literally, the word means like outside. It's an Aramaic bra is outside. It's an outside source, meaning because the Mishnah was looked at as the main sources of the oral Torah, so the brises are the more outside source. It wasn't the main place where people went to understand the halacha. But sometimes, either it is maybe the Mishnah was missing something, or we find a contradiction between two different. Within one opinion, two different sources, that this, in this Mishnah, we'll call him Rabbi Meir, says A, and then another source outside of the Mishnah in a brisa, we'll find Rabbi Meir saying B. And we'll be like, what's going on over here? So sometimes the Gemara will say, oh, this was wrong. Sometimes the Gemara will say, okay, well, let's see if we can make it work. Let's try to give an answer, how to fit the two together to see what his opinion was. So that's something that maybe or maybe not. I don't know in this Gemara that we're going to learn if we're going to see so much of that, But that does those are some terms. Mishnah, Brisa, comes up as we learn, and then the Gemara was written by the Amoraim, right? So those are
After the time.
right after the Tanaim. The Amoraim wrote were the ones who basically wrote down and are the ones who are in the process of speaking out the Gemara, and they are basically trying to understand what the Mishnah is saying.
Why didn't they know what the why? If Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote out the Mishnah, was
Well,
it
he didn't speak out the understanding.
why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, one being that the Mishnah was meant to be shorthand kind of information to give you all the basics. It didn't give you sources. It will tell you something like, how do you do Kedushin? So the first Mishnah in Kedushin tells us the way you marry somebody is, let's say, by using money, is one of three ways. The Mishnah doesn't say how we know that money works. It just says that money works.
Okay.
He didn't put the sources in there. That was still kept to be the oral Torah that people will learn from their Rav or try to see it through the Chumash. As time went on, just like the Mishnah at some point needed to be put down, even though the Gemara itself tells us that it's not meant to be written down. The oral Torah was not meant to be written down, but Rebbe saw that it's going to be lost. People are not going to have access to it if it's not put into writing.
Is Rebbe another way of saying Rabbi
Rabbi Yehuda
Yehuda
Hanasi,
Nasi?
yes.
Okay.
And similar happened with the Gemara, that the Gemara was kept also as an oral law, passed down from Rebbe to Talmud. And at some point they felt that it was necessary to put down the ideas of what was through all those generations, put down into writing into the Gemara. So we have the Gemara, which is going off of the Mishnah and kind of bring down some of those sources. And there are arguments, did he mean this or did he mean that? What's the reason for something the Mishnah says? Might have a discussion about it, an argument about it. Partially being because nothing was put down in absolute writing. So over time, people had their own ideas of what they thought it meant. And so that comes out in the Gemara as an argument, what we call a machlokas. And now we have two ways. And then the work of a person trying to decide the halacha would be, okay, so now that we have these opinions, which way do we go? Based on how the Gemara speaks, what are the ramifications of all these things? So, yeah, I would say that the Gemara is explaining the Mishnah. So, me personally, when I first started really getting into learning, I went through all the Mishnayos. That was one of the first things I did. And I found that it helped me tremendously, and I tell people that they should do it. Not necessarily, learn the Mishnah. Don't open a Gemara until you finish. But you should be on the side learning Mishnayos as well, get that background knowledge. And I myself, over the years, I would be reviewing some of these ideas that I've seen multiple times or whatever it was, and always feel like I don't feel like I really have the understanding of what's going on. There are commentaries on the Mishnah that are explaining to us what does this mean, what does that mean, where's that coming from. But sometimes you still don't feel like they're just giving you the conclusion of this whole discussion that maybe happened in the Gemara. Sometimes you don't feel like you really have
a grasp.
Yeah. So at some point I was like, I can keep going over the same Mishnayos and same commentaries and maybe find a few more commentaries, or I could just open up a Gemara and start learning the Masechtas that are relevant to the parts of the Mishnayos I don't feel like I have such a good grasp on, and get it through that. And sure enough, it does help. I'm telling you, it works.
So before we start, is there what?
I started saying a story. I don't know. But I just want to.
I always interrupt you, Meir. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I think that was an important, just for a little bit of the terminology in the background. I'll just tell you a story just to bring out a little bit of what we're doing when we learn Gemara. So again, because the Gemara has so much discussion and it has arguments, so we'll throw in an idea that what we call a havamina.
Mm-hmm.
A thought, right? This is a possible answer, whatever, and the Gemara will immediately throw it out. Or we'll ask on it and bring a source against it, try to bring it back, eventually say, we're not going to go with that.
What's a havamina?
Havamina, basically, I would have said, meaning it's a thought. It's
okay.
When they use it in the base medrash, when people are learning, and they might say like, how do you use it? So let's say I say this is what the Gemara is saying. I could say it two ways. I say like, this is what the Gemara is saying, and you say no, the Gemara is saying this, and I could be like, what's your havamina? Like, what are you thinking? That might be more like as a slang how people use it. But when we're discussing the different steps of the Gemara, that the Gemara first tried A, it fell off of A, went to B. A person might ask, what was the Havamina of the Gemara to say that?
Like,
Meaning,
what was its thought process to go to
that
this
step,
specific
that of step
that
A,
step?
that's step A. Sometimes it doesn't even sound like it makes any sense. Sometimes you read what we call a Havamina of the Gemara, that thought that the Gemara threw out there, and we're like, how does that help anything? Like, you asked a question, you gave this really bad answer, and straight away the Gemara is like, that's a terrible answer. You're like, what was the Gemara thinking? So some people just spend time just trying to understand
Why
that
the Gemara
thought.
decided to bring that?
Meaning, yeah, what was gained from bringing that?
Right.
So some people think they're going to open up a Gemara, they're going to read a Mishnah, read the Gemara, have a complete, clear understanding of, now I know what everything is, and that's all Gemara is. Just, I have a law, now I have a source, and I'm good. But the Gemara is much more than that. It's a whole dialogue and a whole back and forth, and it really brings out the thought process of how learning works, how it works to like kind of break down, whether it's what the Torah says or something the Rabbanan said. And people sometimes get like confused by the fact that in yeshivas they could spend a whole shiur, a whole class on just the Havamina of the Gemara. Kind of like, why would the Gemara think this, and just spend an hour discussing why the Gemara would have thought that in the first place. So I was once learning in the base medrash, and two guys were learning behind me, and so the classic setup in a yeshiva is that in the morning you prep for shiur, you go to the shiur, and then you come back and you review what was said in shiur, and you try to really lock in the ideas that were said. So these guys prepared, they went to shiur, and it's the afternoon, and they're going over it, and for 2 hours they're just arguing about this one point, going on and on and on and on, and finally the one guy who wasn't getting it, he finally says, "Oh, okay, I got that. Okay, I finally got it. Okay, now we can move on." He was fine. So he moves on, and he says, and now the Gemara throws that out, meaning that step that he had just got was a Havamina, and then he moves on to like what the Gemara actually thinks, and the guy gets all upset. And he's like, "Are you telling me everything we just did was not actually what it means, or that was just a Havamina?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Come on, that's so stupid." And he's like, "Well, that's what Gemara is." So sometimes people don't realize. You asked, what mistakes do people make sometimes? People look at Gemara as just being a book of law. Just like you would open up a textbook and it's just going to tell you, all the things you got to know. Not so much. There's not so much, back and forth and discussion about it. You open up the law, you understand it, you take your test, and you're good.
It's like you want a yes or no answer.
Yeah, but it's not that. There is this whole, and there's a beauty to it. There's a dialogue, and there's all these things going on. And if you don't understand that, sometimes Gemara could be a little bit tricky, because you think you're playing one game and you're really playing a different game. Is what I would kind of look at it as.
Now, before we get started, is there a specific structure to the Gemara that one needs to know in order to be able to really kind of have a grasp of how to follow along?
What do you mean by structure?
So I have another Chevrusa that I learn with Mondays and Thursdays, and so he listed out like the Gemara will pose a kasha. It will bring
a flow.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's also something that people need to gain experience in especially when they start learning Gemara. And unfortunately, some people learn Gemara their whole lives and they don't have these basic ideas down, skills, if you want to call them. I personally think that the Gemara is written in an incredible way. It wasn't only written once or whatever. They drafted it, they wrote it out, and it really flows very nicely. Like, the more you understand how Gemara flows, there's a skill into itself, just understanding what's going on in the Gemara, how it flows and whatever. And once you have that skill, as you're learning, you kind of know already where the Gemara is headed. Like, before you kind of see what the Gemara says, you already know what's happening. Meaning, you see one word and you know the Gemara is about to ask a question. And when it doesn't, or it says the word that you think is going to be a question and it doesn't do that, you're like, you're thrown off. And then you look at Rashi and he's like, "Oh, no. So he'll say it means this." I mean, he'll say the Gemara is not being so exact in how it spoke. Why it does that, I'm not sure, but it flows beautifully. And there are a couple of Masechtas actually we have throughout Shas that don't flow as well, and it's actually noticed by the Gemara itself that it will say like Nidarim is a little bit strange the way it speaks. So
Nidarim?
Nidarim, one of the Masechtas,
Okay.
the Tiferes Yisrael, who's a commentary on the Mishnayos, actually says that those Masechtas that don't flow as well is because they weren't written out, like they only had like, let's say, a single draft instead of two drafts before it was edited for the final product. So it clearly is written out in a very clear, as concise kind of way that a person could follow it at once he picks up those ideas. And there are key words that you pick up on, that that when it says this word, what the Gemara, again, there are exceptions, but for the most part, what's coming, what's happening. So you kind of have to have that map of how the Gemara works and how it flows when you learn it. And that's a skill that usually beginners try to pick up. They come to yeshiva, especially the Baal Tshuva yeshivas, they focus on that. They make sure, that, you understand this word is a key word. You got to know this word. If you don't know this word, you're going to learn Gemara wrong your whole life, So you can have someone extremely smart, and, he can grasp ideas very quickly. But there's still work to do when it comes to understanding how Gemara flows and just how to read the book. Okay, so...
sorry.
We're learning Beitza. No, we're gonna open
Premature
it up.
opening?
No, we're gonna open it up.
Okay.
We're gonna open up Beitza.
I feel like you really like Beitza. I feel like every time I see you, you're learning
I remember learning
Beitza.
Beitza with you in French Hill.
Probably.
I remember learning it. We learned Erev Tavshilin. Yeah, in the back of the shul over there.
Yes.
We learned it in the office.
Because we've tried to
make time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember what we learned. We learned the second parak of Beitza. We learned Erev Tavshilin. So I think I was learning it in Kol at that time. That's what I was, in the middle of learning it. So I chose to learn it with you. Being that it was just Yom Tif, I happened over Shavuos. I was learning something in Beitza as well. With the Chevrusa, we were learning one of the halachas. So we're gonna look at Beitza Daf Yud Dalid.
This way.
Yeah.
Yud Dalid.
So each page we call a daf, right? Meaning it goes by number. So we have, let's say, it starts on Beis, Gimel, Dalid, and so on. Keep going back. You're almost there.
I know my alphabet.
One more. And we're good. So this is Yud Dalid. So the daf refers to the full page, right? And then the Amud refers to just one side of the page. So this is Yud Dalid, Amud Aleph, meaning the first side of Yud Dalid. And so that's what we're looking at. We have a Mishnah over here, and we'll start from there, and we'll go through.
This is something also that I've been curious about, because my brain goes, why don't we start from the beginning of the...
Yeah, that might make sense. I like this.
That's fine. So this learning is going to be in Refuah for Hadassah Leah Bat Arona Sarah.
Now, what we're learning about over here, so we know on Yom Tov, different than Shabbos, the Torah says explicitly that you're not allowed to do malacha on Yom Tov like on Shabbos, right? So you're not allowed to, it gets a little bit complicated once we introduce this new halacha in, but let's take something that for sure you can't do, and the problem is everything. You're not allowed to plow on Yom Tov, let's say, right? That's, let's say, more obvious that you're not allowed to do that. What the Torah does say you're allowed to do is anything that's relevant to what it calls ochel nefesh, for eating purposes, cooking, you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. So as we know, a lot of people will cook on Yom Tov, right? You're allowed to put up a pot of water in order to make your coffee. You don't have to set up an urn even, right? It's nice that way. Yom Tov, the Torah wants you to have fresh food, feel geschmack.
In a way, Yom Tov is easier to keep than Shabbos, at least on my end.
So it depends. Yeah, it could.
You can pass fire. You can do just like different things that are more restrictive on Shabbos.
Right. Now, it doesn't end there. We're not going to get into this so much, but it doesn't only end at eating purposes, but even other things are mutter as well, meaning, let's say you're allowed to, at least back then, nowadays it's a little bit different. We have electricity, but you're allowed to light candles. Now, candles are not necessarily being used for cooking purposes, and nevertheless, the Gemara tells us that since you're allowed to do the malacha of havara, of lighting a fire, for cooking purposes, you're allowed to do it as well for non-cooking purposes. Now, there are restrictions to that, and you have to know how the rules work, and things are a little bit complicated over there, and exactly what we allow, what we don't allow. But that is the basic idea. Okay. So this specifically, this Mishnah is dealing with the malacha of grinding, right? On Shabbos, you're not allowed to grind things that most of the things we speak about when it comes to the malacha of tochen, of grinding, would be things that grow from the ground. So, let's say I'm not allowed to mince an onion on Shabbos, make very small pieces, or even if I want to make a salad, I can't make the pieces very fine, like cucumbers, tomatoes. I have to make them a little bit bigger than I usually would, in order for it to be allowed on Shabbos. On Yom Tif, obviously, for eating purposes, I'm allowed to do tochen. I'm allowed to I'm allowed to mash my potatoes if I want.
Okay.
Right? So here we're talking about grinding spices. So the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Imrim, Tavlin nidochen b'madach shel eitz, v'hamelach b'pach uveitz haparor. So Beis Shammai says that spices could be crushed. A madach is a pestle, right? So you have the mortar and pestle, back in the olden days.
What's a pestle?
So you have the mortar is the bowl.
Okay.
Which you put.
And the pestle is the
grinder.
Okay.
Right. So he says you have to use the pestle. Specifically has to be wood. Obviously, the more common used material would be stone. It obviously does a better job. So for some reason, as we'll get into it, we're going to see Beis Shammai requires you to do it in a abnormal kind of way. You have to change it up. You can't do it in the normal tools you would use. That you wouldn't be allowed to. You have to use something a little bit more out of the ordinary. So that's spices in general. We'll call that black pepper and stuff like that.
And this specifically for Yom Tif, not Shabbos.
This is only
Yom Tif.
This would be completely not allowed on Shabbos.
Okay.
But on Yom Tif, there's what to talk about. And so that's spices in general. And melach, salt, you have to use a pach or eitz haparor. So I don't know what a pach is exactly. I assume some sort of tool that you can crush with. And an eitz haparor is some sort of big spoon, apparently. So imagine you could take a rolling pin and just smash your things, but you can't use your mortar and pestle in the normal way, or you can't use. Maybe this is whatever. According to Beis Shammai, you for sure wouldn't be allowed to use your little pepper grinder.
Yeah.
Your spice grinder has a different problem, that it's electronic. So that's stam a problem, and he didn't have electronic in those days. So clearly, spices he allows in a limited way, but he allows more. But the salt, if you notice, he doesn't even let you use the mortar and pestle at all.
Right.
You have to use completely different.
So the question
tools.
is why? What's the difference?
Yeah. So okay, that's one question.
There's a few questions I have. Why?
Okay. You can ask them. We can see Beis Hillel first, just to see the other opinion.
Yeah, sure.
Beis Hillel Imrim. So Beis Hillel argues and says, Tavlin is niduchin kedarkan b'madach shel even. Spices, you're good. You can use a regular pestle that's made out of stone. V'hamelach b'madach shel eitz. But the salt, he still holds, has to be slightly different, and you have to use a wooden one.
So yeah, the question.
That's our Mishnah. Yeah.
So the questions I would have: what's the difference between doing it with a stone pestle and a wooden pestle?
That's again. That's for the idea that because something, they made it necessary that you can't do it in the normal way. They need you to do something abnormal,
right,
to allow it. So
what is
a pestle of stone was the norm.
Wait, so does Hillel also hold that you have to do it in an abnormal way?
So spices, no. Salt,
yes.
He says yes. You have to do it in an abnormal way.
Okay.
Less than Beis Shammai. He's
less stringent.
Yeah, because Beis Shammai says spices you have to have. We're going to call it shinoi, doing it in an abnormal way. So Beis Shammai holds you can use the pestle, but it has to be made out of wood for spices. And salt you have to use, we'll call it a rolling pin. You have to get some random kitchen appliance in order to crush them. Beis Hillel says you could do the spices normally with a regular mortar and pestle. The salt, again, he's one level, less stringent, one level upgraded, that you're allowed to use the pestle, but it has to be made out of wood. Still some level of shinoi.
Okay. Those are really my questions. What are questions that you have?
So the obvious question here would be, well, what's going on? Like we spoke about before, the Mishnah is giving us the basic ruling. So if we would just read this Mishnah and say, okay, well, can I do this in real life? So we generally pass like Beis Hillel.
But right? if you can do things on Yom Tov in terms of cooking,
right?
Why do you have to do them with a shinoi?
Exactly. No, that's exactly
the question.
That's exactly what the Gemara is going to discuss. Meaning, Obviously, we have.
It's such a good feeling.
Yeah.
It's just a good feeling when you're when you ask a question that like.
So that's what the Gemara is there for. The Mishnah doesn't explain to us much of why this is happening. It's just this is the way it is, right? And then the Gemara is going to come along and okay, well let's discuss why is it that way.
Okay.
So the obvious question here, like you're pointing out, would be whichever opinion we go like, according to everybody, we see at least salt needs a shinoi. Why is that? What's going on over here? So we'll take a look at Rashi. The Rashi right before the Gemara, V'hamelech b'madach shel eitz.
We're on this side?
Yeah.
V'hamelech. Ah, I see.
V'hamelech b'madach shel eitz. So this is Beis Hillel said, you have to grind the salt, you have to crush the salt using a pestle of wood. And so Rashi explains, Shinoi boi, like we spoke out, he needs a Shinoi. He needs there to be a different way of doing it. Aval, Sagi b'hai Shinoi zuta. But according to Beis Hillel, it's enough with this small Shinoi. That's good enough.
Okay.
And he doesn't need as big of a Shinoi as Beis Shammai, but he still nonetheless needs something to be changed. Okay?
Okay. I still don't understand. Like, even just why, if you can cook and do stuff for food, why you even need a shinoi? Why can't you just do it in the regular way? Okay.
And then once we do have an answer, the question becomes: is this, or going into it, we should be thinking: is this something that, according to the Torah, is usher, or it's only rabbinical that you're not allowed to do it? Meaning, whatever limitation for whatever reason we have on grinding spices on Yom Tif, is that something we find in like some we'll call it like a logic that comes from the Torah, or is limited from some halacha you find about Yom Tif that we're not maybe knowledgeable of yet, or is it just a derabbanan idea that they enacted that makes this halacha come about? So says the Gemara, the kuli alma mias melech ba'yishinoi. Everyone, meaning both opinions in the Mishnah we saw, both say that salt needs a shinoi. And the Gemara asks the simple question, my taimo, why? Right? So we already gave the necessary background to understand why this is a good question. Well, why does anything need a shinoi? You're allowed to grind stuff.
Right.
Right? So what's going on over here?
Is that where you say, what's the havamina? Would you say that in this instance?
Not so much. You could. As if someone says it, I wouldn't say you're wrong. It's more like a question of like, what's going on? Like, I'm missing something. Like, what's happening?
Okay.
So here we have a machlokes, Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda. So we have two opinions, Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Chad Amar, we don't know who said which one, but we have the following transmitted to us that one of those opinions said, Kol ha'geder kulon tzrichas melech. Every pot needs salt. Meaning anything you cook is going to need salt. That's obvious. But v'ein kol ha'geder tzrichas tavlin. Not every pot needs spice.
So they're making a distinction between salt and spice. There's apparently a distinction between the two.
I mean, we see that in the Mishnah already, right?
What's the distinction? Like, why don't we consider salt spice, or vice versa?
For what the Gemara just said. So the Gemara says, yeah.
So the Gemara. This is that's what the Gemara is answering, is that salt. All pots of food will need salt, but not all pots of food will need spice.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how we distinct. That's the distinction between salt and spices.
Yeah.
It's not like a texture thing.
Not sure what that means. What do you mean? No, the question should be asking.
It just seems that salt is a type. You could categorize salt as a type of spice.
We're distinguishing them for some reason, which we're trying to figure out. And what the Gemara is saying is that this is the difference, that everything needs salt and not everything needs spice.
So what's the question I should be asking?
Do you know what that means?
No.
Oh, okay. So that's the question you should be asking. That's pretty simple, no? You read something, you've no idea what it means.
But like, I like salt and everything. So like, saying everything that needs salt, I'm like, yeah, okay.
No, that's fine. You should be okay with that. That's normal. But how did it answer our question? Why is that a difference? What does that difference mean? Everything needs salt. Okay, so
So
therefore you
so
got to do a
therefore you have to
shinoi.
do it with shinui.
But my spices that I didn't know, so now I'm allowed to do that, at least according to Beis Hillel, in the normal way. You understand what you're saying?
No.
Okay, so see, this is the problem. If you're gonna learn Gemara and you're not gonna try to understand what it's saying, what's the point of learning Gemara?
Weiter?
Well, you don't want to understand it.
I do want to understand, but but is the understanding going to come from us just talking, or are they going to explain it?
So sometimes you get a better understanding as you move on in the Gemara. Sometimes, like the line that was said itself, just needs a little bit more of an explanation. Usually speaking, what people would do is they might try to discuss it first amongst themselves, like, well, let's think about what that means, and then they would go to Rashi, would be the first commentary to take a peek at and see, like, okay, does he add some information for me?
Okay.
We could go on and maybe it would come up in the Gemara that whatever. We could try to just discuss what would that mean? Why would that be a thing? Again, I know this Gemara already, so I'm a little bit biased. I know.
No, it's okay.
I'm trying to keep it very. I'm being very neutral here. I didn't use any words when I was speaking out the Gemara of what it could possibly mean.
I'm
so
very proud of you.
I'm leaving the room open to you if you want to take a shot at it.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I like learning with you. It's because you make me like think.
Use the brain.
Well, critical thinking is difficult.
It's very important.
You know, critical thinking is very difficult.
Someone who doesn't have critical thinking skills, good luck learning Gemara. It's not going to work.
I feel like there's good luck just kind of like going through life.
Also,
you know,
so Gemara does give that skill to people. It is interesting. You see that people learn Gemara,
so
have that critical, analytical
mindset.
Yeah, it's very good. Anyway, so
the question we're posing is why? How does this answer the question of why do you need a shinui with salt and what about
salt makes it that we don't want you to do it on Yom Tov in the normal way?
My first thought was like, well, salt's a flavor enhancer, but so you could make the same argument about spices. Is it the way the way that salt was like how you bought salt and how you bought spices?
Whatever you say has to fit into what the words of the Gemara say. Yeah.
Can you explain more? I like the word expound for some reason.
The Gemara says very clearly it's because everything needs salt and not everything needs spice. So whatever you say has to fit within those words. It can't be like, I'm going to make something up outside of those words now.
I hear.
And then say that's what it means.
I hear.
It is a funny Gemara. Like, at first glance, you might be like, well, that doesn't really give me much information. So we could take a look at Rashi.
Everything needs salt. It's like a riddle.
You could read it. You could say it as one.
It's like a riddle. Everything needs salt, but not everything needs.
So the way
spices.
Okay, so how would we try to break this down? We would say, well, the fact that everything needs salt is the reason, therefore, that I should do it in a more abnormal way.
Because everything needs it?
Yeah, that's what it's saying, right?
Yeah, but why wouldn't you assume that because everything? Why wouldn't you assume the opposite? Why wouldn't you assume?
No, because the Mishnah tells me it needs a shinoi, and the Gemara tells me it's because everything needs salt. So I'm just connecting the two and saying we're trying to figure it out. We have A, we have B, and now that creates.
Right, but I'm saying I would have thought the other way.
Meaning you want to go against the Mishnah.
It's not that I want to go against.
You're saying the line of reasoning you would think because everything needs salt sounds actually counterproductive to what the Mishnah is saying.
Yeah.
Why?
Not necessarily counterproductive to what the counterintuitive to what the Mishnah. Yeah. So I would want to go against the Mishnah, but I'm not going to go against. But like I would want to, because if everything needs salt, then why wouldn't you? Because it's already regular, do it the regular way.
Right.
And not everything needs spices, so that you could put that under the category of irregular. So you would do that in an irregular way. I'm not making any sense. Am I making any sense?
What you're saying has, I mean, yeah, that's what's bothering you. It makes sense what's bothering you.
Yeah.
So let's see Rashi.
We will get better at this. I will get better at this. You're good at this.
Don't worry about it. So it says Rashi, Kol Kederos.
Yeah.
So Kol Mine Tavshil, all types of dishes, Tzrichas Melech. So first of all, I just want to point out what Rashi did here for us.
Say that. Say.
All types of dishes. Tafshil is just any cooked dish, right? Need salt. That's the first half of Rashi. So I just want to point out what Rashi did for us.
But didn't the Gemara just say that?
Well, sort of. Well, I'm just gonna say the literal translation of what the Gemara just said, and then Rashi just made it a little bit more
Cohesive.
No, more. It made it. I can't think of the word I want, but just brought it more in a more practical way of saying it. Meaning, literally, what the Gemara says is that all pots need salt. Now, I don't know about you, but my pot on its own with nothing in it doesn't need salt. Okay, you getting it?
I hear. No, I hear.
What does it mean? Pots.
He made it more exact.
Well, yeah, because it's not about the pot needing salt.
It's about the food needing salt.
The food that's in the pot needs salt. So Rashi, first, just let's make sure we're on the same page. Rashi says what the Gemara means is any cooked dish, what goes into the pot, the thing that is in the pot needs salt. Okay, so that's just a good, clear definition, translation of what the Gemara wants. Okay, we could ask, so why did the Gemara use the word pot as opposed to cooked dish? Fine. I mean, if I would have to assume, the first thought that would pop into my head is the word tafshil is a cooked dish, right? So every cooked dish needs salt. That sounds a little bit to me like I'm saying, like, I already have my spaghetti and meatballs on the table, and it needs salt. But it's almost more exact to talk about it in the cooking process.
Right.
While you're cooking it, it needs salt.
That's
so
what
you call
Rashi's
it the
saying.
pot. No, so that's the pot. That's
Okay.
why the Gemara would use the word the pot. The pot, every pot, as you're cooking, needs salt. Rashi's explaining what the pot represents, the thing you're cooking.
Right. Is the food.
Yeah, the Gemara, in a way, the Gemara is more exact, but Rashi's just helping you along, making sure you're
on the same page.
Which anyone who would read this Gemara and be like, "Why does the pot need salt?" Like, I hope he realized that it means the dish needs salt. But it is interesting to note. No, there is something here to note that the Gemara used a strange language to bring out its point, and Rashi felt the need even to go and explain to us what that really meant. That screams out to me of like, so why'd the Gemara do that? Okay, we could translate it very nicely. We can have a nice read on it. It works. But why did it do that? Fine. So that's so what? That's just what the Gemara told. So hilkach. Therefore, so obviously with the therefore, it means now we're going to give a reason. Because of that, because everything needs salt. Therefore, the reasoning here is the following. Yesterday, the guy already knew that he had to crush it. So that's already a line of reasoning. We still have to speak it out a little bit, but that's already something more to work with. You want to take a hit at it?
Well, it sounds like Rashi's saying that because you know everything needs salt, you should have already pre-prepared it before Yontif.
Yep.
And not necessarily everything needs spices. So if you're like tasting this soup and you're like, it could use this spice.
Or I would say more, you don't even know what you, back then for sure, they didn't have fridges and stuff. They didn't know.
Go on.
They didn't know what they want to cook.
Right.
So then they decide the next day, okay, I decided I'm going to make a brisket with, that should taste like this. I decided on the spot, that's how I'm going to cook it. So now I have to decide what spices do I need for that. Now I know what I need. Yesterday, I didn't know what I was cooking. But salt, obviously we're going to put salt on everything you cook. But I feel anything you cook is going to use salt.
But I feel like that still doesn't answer our question.
Why not?
Because just because I knew that it would need it, that doesn't answer the question. Okay, because if I can prepare on Yontif to cook,
so now
why do I have to prepare?
Fine. Now we have to give an understanding, a line of reasoning, why it seems like this is how they saw that this is fit, that this is how the halacha should come out. Because you knew in advance, therefore, don't wait till Yom Tif. What would be the thought behind that? So, I would think that it seems to be telling me that if something doesn't have to be done on Yom Tif, either you know about it beforehand or something like that. I don't want to get into it. You know beforehand that you're going to need this thing. You shouldn't be doing it on Yom Tif unnecessarily. And even though, yes, the Torah says you're allowed to do it, if
It's still better to prepare it beforehand.
if it doesn't, yeah, if you knew for a fact you needed it. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to go out of their way to obligate you, therefore, to make your menu before, figure out all the spices you need, crush them before. No, but something you for sure you know you need beforehand, they said you got to do beforehand.
Why?
So, two thoughts would come into my mind. Again, these are just speaking it out. One thought would be, if I still have them in my head while I'm thinking. 1 second. Yeah, sometimes that happens. You know, the thoughts come into your mind and then
100%.
they go out. One thought would be, they didn't want you to do anything that they saw as unnecessary work.
We're not trying to add work to Yontif.
Or yeah, we're still trying to give Yom Tif a feel of Yom Tif. So anything you know beforehand you needed and you could have easily done, then that's what we expect you to do. Whether in order that Yom Tif still has its like, either I could say that Yom Tif should have a still a feeling of like kedusha, that there is a holiness to the day, there is an importance to the day, much like Shabbos.
There's still
and not people just like, oh, I could do whatever I want. That could be one thought. That's one thought. Or stam, that a person shouldn't be doing too much work. They don't want a person doing all these things all day. They should have some time to relax. So any work that you knew you could have done beforehand, get that done.
It seems like they want to still make try to make as clear of a separation between a regular day and Yontif.
That's one idea. Yeah, I think that's possibly one idea that we could.
Do we care about the why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sometimes the more you understand something and how it works out like that, it helps you understand whether it's the opinion in the Gemara or how the halacha comes out. It helps you understand it better. You understand the opinion on a greater level. You understand the ramifications of it better. So it brings you a better understanding, and then it might play out in the long run of why it is this way. So what if I didn't do my salt XYZ and now I want to do it? Whatever. In this case, I don't have like any, what we call nafkamina, any difference that would come out based on any understanding I would have. But a lot of times in the Gemara, different ways that you can explain the Gemara, it will present different ways of the outcome of what that would look like in actualization. Also, I'm saying the more you understand something, the deeper you go, is you're further understanding Torah. It's the mitzvah of learning Torah. That itself is something that we try to do in.
Right, but do we need to know the why to? Do we need to know the why to? I guess that's our question. Why is salt different than the spices? Yeah, okay. I'm just coming full circle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, based on this understanding, it's because I knew I needed to do it yesterday, and therefore they basically obligated me to do it yesterday. So first of all, that maybe sounds like 2 points I want to bring out is, number one, so let's say someone had like a plumbing problem in his house. Erev Yom Tif, like he was planning on grinding up his salt before Yom Tif. He knows that he's supposed to do that. Okay? He wakes up in the morning, goes to shul, comes home, and his toilet exploded. And the whole day he's just dealing with plumbers and cleaning up his house and whatever. Comes Yom Tif, his wife lights the candles. He's like, I didn't grind any salt, right? So it could be there's room to say that. The problem is he's allowed to grind the salt in the Mishnah. I'm saying that's not like the guy we're speaking about that knew and didn't do it. This guy couldn't do it.
Right.
So in a way it's a little bit better. So maybe we'd be more lenient on him. Let's say, I don't know what the case would be, because if he could just do it with a shinoi, he should do it with a shinoi. But maybe, like, let's say he doesn't have any way to do it with a shinoi.
Okay.
He might be allowed to do it. But also it's interesting to note, even though they basically said that you should do it with a shinoi, and the reason is because you should have done it beforehand, is what it sounds like, they still let you do it if you didn't do it.
Right.
Right? Just, we want you to do a shinoi. So what would the shinoi be bringing out? That I mean, it sounds like to me that we make you do it with Shina because you should have done it beforehand.
should have done it
and
before.
you should be aware of that. We're not going to say, oh well, you need salt, and we don't want you lose out on good food on Yom Tif, so you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to do it. We don't want you to do that, and really, we want you to do it beforehand. So we found this like okay medium. In general, people because of this reasoning will do it beforehand, but if it for whatever reason he didn't do it, he'll do it with a shinoi, and then he'll tell him, oh, this is annoying. Maybe next year I'll make sure to do it the proper way that they wanted me to do it. So that's the first opinion. The second opinion, back to the Gemara, V'chad Amar Kol Tavlan Mafigan Taman, all spices they lose their flavor. Umelach Eina Mafiga Tama, and salt doesn't lose flavor. Right, so I think that's easier to explain, self-explanatory of what that means. Is that you agree?
Yeah, that with time,
Meaning, why is it that salt?
Pun intended. Get it with time. Haha.
Salt. I got it.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
I got it. Salt, I should do beforehand, right? But spices, I don't need to do beforehand. Now the question is, why?
So he's coming to say because if you were to do the spices beforehand, then you wouldn't get the full satisfaction of the spices within the food that you're cooking. But that if you did it beforehand, but that doesn't apply to salt.
Because salt doesn't lose flavor over time.
Salt doesn't lose flavor over time.
So therefore,
I like that reasoning.
You understand it better? Or you like it?
I understand it better.
I like this reasoning also.
Yes, I understand. Okay, you know what? I understand it better, and I like it better.
Why do you like it better?
It makes more sense. I think it make. I think no. I think in regards to the idea that you can prepare food on Yontif.
Why is that better? I'm saying both opinions still come out with the same conclusion that you have to do it beforehand if you could, and if you didn't do it beforehand, you have to use a shinoi.
I think it just makes more sense.
I think it might.
I understand
that, but you didn't explain why.
I didn't explain why.
You seem to be emotionally connected more to this reasoning.
I am more emotionally connected to this reasoning.
I think we're dealing with logic right now, though. So.
Okay. My ignorance is showing. Is it ignorance? Is it? What is it? What would it be?
No, it could be that you connect more to that reasoning maybe because you grasp it faster or whatever it is. Maybe there's something about it you're just not finding what it is that speaks to you more about this answer that makes more sense to you.
I think that the idea of hold on, I have to get the first reasoning right in my head again. The first reasoning was that because everything needs salt, you should do it beforehand.
Because you know you're going to need it.
So what?
I mean, so what would be seemingly the reason we were trying to say before, that because you know what's needed beforehand, therefore, since you could have done it before, you shouldn't be pushing it off.
But what else does that apply to? Would you apply that to other things then as well? Because
seemingly, if I know for a fact that I'm going to use something, if I know the day before, I know for a fact I'm going to use something, seemingly the logic would apply that I should do it.
I connect.
That's fine.
Yeah, I connect more to the understanding that spices lose their flavor and salt doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the second answer, just as a thought, is that it's quite. I mean, in both reasoning, I think it shows itself a little bit more in the second one, that you see, they take into account, seemingly petty things, if you want to call it. What's the difference if so my black pepper, that if I grind it fresh, it's going to really have that oomph, but if I do it beforehand, it's not going to have the same. So
is that true? I mean, you're a cook, so this stuff.
Yeah, no, fresh ground spices are much. If you taste cumin is a good example, or cinnamon. But cumin, if you take cumin that's been ground up and you bought in the store, it's been sitting on the shelf for I don't know how long. So it does taste like cumin. I'm not going to say it doesn't taste like cumin. If you add enough into the pot, you'll taste the cumin taste. Okay? If you grind up your own cumin and taste it side by side, the powder one that you buy in the store will taste like cardboard. I kid you not. I've tried it. It will taste like cardboard. It is definitely true that we're not going to sit here and talk about what, spices have oils in them and the aromas escape once you grind them. Okay, there is a science behind it.
As we talk about it.
There is a reason why this happens. This is true. But most people would think, I'm going to go to the rabbi, I'm going to ask him, do I have to grind my black pepper before Yom Tov? Like, it's going to lose flavor. And he'd be like, what's the difference? Food is food. Just eat it however it is. It doesn't matter.
It's not true.
And the Gemara clearly says that no, if your spices are going to lose flavor, it makes a difference. Salt won't lose flavor, so do it beforehand. It's not going to make a difference.
Well, one argument seems to be worried about your enhancement of the enjoyment of Yontif.
Yes.
Rather than the
so that's why I was saying
the latter.
I appreciate the second
the latter. Yeah, that's what I meant. The latter seems to take in the enjoyment of Yontif
more than the first one. Yeah. Now it's interesting to me. Wow.
No, this made me smile. Okay,
good. The first. So the next thing the Gemara is going to do is tell us what comes out as the differences between them. But the question that sometimes the Gemara will ask this kind of question, and I'm pretty sure the Gemara here doesn't ask this question, that I would ask the question, is maybe because we like the second reasoning better than the first, what would the first opinion say to the second? Why wouldn't he say, yeah, it's going to lose flavor? Why doesn't he care about that?
Why doesn't the first opinion
take that into account? And we can ask, the other way is true as well. Why doesn't the second opinion take into account that you might know you need something before, or salt specifically? Why does he have to come on to a different reason? Once you know you need salt, just grind the salt.
Well, they both. I mean, I assume that they're both coming at sanctifying Yontif, but in different ways.
Okay.
One is saying you sanctify Yontif by still preparing for it earlier and making a separation,
not having to do extra work,
not doing extra work, and that in that mindset is sanctifying Yontif, as in the second one is no. In order to sanctify Yontif, you want it as joyful as possible, and the way to do that is that your food will be as joyful.
The end of this Tosos, you might have something there. Sometimes I would say that's a cute shot, but is that really? But I hear what you're saying, and the Tosos might actually say something like you. But for now, let's go ahead. But that's a question that I would raise. I'm not saying we're going to necessarily come up with an answer. I mean, you're posing a certain answer. It's just perspective of what's more important. I think it's a good answer. It's a good thought. We would have to see through commentary. Like, I would want to check that up. I would want to look around in the commentaries. Okay, what do they say? Is that the case? Is that a valid way of viewing it? I'm not saying your answer is bad. I appreciate the question.
You said the answer was good.
Yeah, I'm just making sure. I'm just reiterating that to make sure you're,
Thank you.
I do like the question more than the question is always there to bring about thought. And an answer is very finite. So question, it's like I want to maybe dwell on the question a little bit more, think from different angles of what, why is reason one good? Why is reason two good? So from what would they see that they don't like about it? You're giving one approach. I like the question a little bit. Leave it open ended for now. Think about it a little bit more. Come back to it, and see what we can make of it. Okay, but
I really like answers.
You like answers?
I like answers.
Good luck with Gemara, buddy.
Thanks.
No problem. So now the Gemara says, "My benayu." Okay, so the end of the line over there.
There, got it.
My benayu. What's the difference between them? So classically, we have a machlokus. We have two different opinions. Is there any difference between these two understandings? So besides when we ask why in something the Gemara said, the Gemara itself sometimes will ask, does that make a difference? The Mishnah says you need to do a shinoi when you grind salt. What do I care what the reason is? So if there's a difference between the two reasonings, so then yeah, thanks for telling me both reasons. Now I see a difference between them. If you're going to tell me no, there's no difference, so then why are you having this discussion? So the Gemara says no, there is a difference. I'll tell you what it is. So Ika benayu, the difference between them is The Yadamai Kedera Boil of Shule. If someone knows what his pot is going to need to cook, meaning if he knows in advance what he's going to make and what spices he's going to need, according to the first opinion, he has to grind them before Yom Tov, or he's going to have to do a Shinoi on Yom Tov, according to Beis Hillel, even according to Beis Hillel. But according to the second opinion, that it's not about the knowledge of the prior knowledge of I know what I need and what I don't need, or I don't know what I need. It doesn't make a difference. It's just, does it lose flavor or not? So he's going to say, even if I know I want to use certain spices tomorrow, I don't have to grind them now because they're going to lose flavor. Okay?
Okay.
Inami, another difference is going to be Marika. Marika is going to be another thing.
What's Marika?
What is Marika? Exactly. So Marika is saffron, is the way Rashi explains it.
Okay.
So apparently saffron doesn't lose flavor once it's ground. Okay?
Okay.
So
that would go under the same category as salt.
Right. So according to the second opinion, it would be the same as salt that you don't need to do a shinoi. You do. I'm sorry.
You do need to do a shinoi.
You do need to do because you could have done it yesterday.
Right.
But according to the first opinion, that just because saffron doesn't lose flavor, it doesn't mean I have to do it the day before because I didn't necessarily think that I was going to use it on Yom Tov. If I knew beforehand, then yeah. But I'm saying let's
wait. I thought the second opinion said that it is about the flavor.
Yeah, so since it doesn't lose flavor, I have to do a shinoi. But according to the first opinion,
is because it's
if I know about it or I don't, since not everything needs saffron, right? So if I know beforehand, then yeah, I would have to do it before. But if I wasn't thinking I'm for sure going to make biryani, then I don't have to do it before.
Biryani.
Whatever.
What is it?
It's an Indian thing that has saffron in it.
Okay. We're learning. This is a whole. We're going to learn about everything.
Okay, so that is the basic idea of what we have here so far.
Okay.
Okay, that's just the basic setup of the machlokas. So obviously, just at face value right now, if Shulchan Aruch would come along and paskin opinion number 1 halachically. So you have to grind your salt with a shinoi or in advance, as well as anything you're making. People make menus nowadays in advance, or then anything they know for sure they would want to use more freshly ground or whatever, they would have to do it ahead of time. According to that's so. If let's say, I think most people use pepper in their dishes, right?
I don't.
Okay,
but I'm not most people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say if I could assume that basically everything I cook I put black pepper into, according to the first opinion, I would have to grind some black pepper before Yom Tov.
Okay.
According to the second opinion, even though I know I'm for sure going to use black pepper tomorrow, I do not have to.
Because it will lose its flavor.
It will lose its flavor. However, if I have a spice that I don't think it makes so much of a difference if I do it the day before, then I would have to do it with a shinoi or.
So is salt's just a stand-in for anything that either doesn't.
One of these ways. Yeah.
One of these ways.
Yeah.
So either you could have done it beforehand or it doesn't lose its flavor.
Yeah.
Okay.
What fascinates me about the Gemara, by the way, is that they sell salt grinders, like they sell pepper mills. They sell salt grinders, but there's no reason to have it freshly ground. That's just pointing that out. I mean, there is maybe a slight reason to have it, but I'm just pointing.
It just
out.
Makes it smaller.
Yeah, but you could have ground it all up before.
Yeah, but it makes it easier.
Yeah, you don't have to grind it up before.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But it's not about the taste. If anyone tells you it's because it tastes better,
it's not about the taste.
Okay, fine. As long as we're on that page, yeah.
There's a. I know you don't do like social media or anything, but there's this reel of this girl who's like, if you want to make your salt taste better, like your sea salt taste better or something, just take the salt and take the table salt and just add a little table salt to it. And like she's like the reel's like placed up at her, and like you just have like a bunch of other guys like watching her reel just I thought it was funny.
It's perplexing to me.
The world is an interesting place.
Okay. Fine. So that's the starting point of this Gemara. We'll call it a day here. I'm happy to continue this Gemara at some point just to see a little bit more of the process of learning Gemara. That's just a very basic start to seeing how the Mishnah said something. The Gemara asked, what's going on exactly. We broke it down. We gave two reasonings. We gave a difference of how those two reasonings would come out, and obviously how that would play out in halacha would look different as well. Like you said, what you said though, I just want to let me just finish off with this, that it's very important what you said.
What did I say?
I'm going to tell you in a moment.
Thank you.
You made the point that so salt is a stand-in for, based on whichever reasoning you hold of, for one of these things. Meaning, if it's that salt, it happens to be something you need, so anything you need would be like salt. Or if it's something that doesn't lose flavor, if you find other things that don't lose flavor, would be the same, right? That's the point you made.
Yeah.
I think that you asked in the beginning what are some things that a person has to know in order to learn Gemara properly. What are mistakes that people make? Is that the Gemara is not going to spell everything out for you, but it's going to give you a basic guideline, if you will, something to work with, to which you can extrapolate from, and say, well, okay, well, A is like B. So if the Gemara is saying this about A, then I can apply the same thing to B. That's what we do. It's what Chazal call all of learning is being medama milsa milsa. It's comparing one thing to the other and seeing, are they the same or are they not the same? Right? So when you look at anything in the world, when we look at anything, we can ask ourselves, there are similarities between two things, as well as, or there are just differences between two things. And if I ask you, is there a similarity between a table and the ceiling? Not so much.
What?
Right? But if I ask you if there's a similarity between a table and a chair, so there's a slight similarity.
They both hold.
What?
Both hold things.
Both hold things. So I don't necessarily sit on a table, not so normal, and I sit on a chair, so there is that difference. But I could put my books on the table, and I could put my books, if I need a place to put some books, I need a place to put something down for a moment, I could put it on a chair. It is a flat surface. It's not meant for that, though. If I wanted to compare a table with a stender, would be a good example. A stender, right? Stender, a slanted slab of wood held up by two vertical poles, which it was created by someone, I don't know originally who created it, but in America someone came up with this idea to make an ADHD desk. Okay, so
that's what a stender is.
Yeah, that's what it is.
100%.
Someone
that's
made
a
it.
Great way to explain that.
So you need to stand up and move around a little bit while you're learning.
Well, also while you're sitting, you can rock it back and forth. You can bring it closer to you.
Okay, yeah. So there are. I can't really bring this table closer to me without spilling your tea.
And like the legs.
No, I got it.
Yeah.
I could bring a stender closer to me, so I could. There's a certain ease I can have while learning at a stender that I can have in front of me like this. I can bring it closer to me. I can then lean it back and have it standing there with my Gemara on it while I speak with you. Then bring it back to me.
Right.
I could stand up and learn. It's closer to me. I maybe could see it better if I want to stand up. If I want to stand up with this, it would be a little bit hard to learn. I would have to bend down to look at it, right? So there are lots of similarities between tables and stenders. There are also differences. You wouldn't really eat at a stender, a bad eating surface. A table, it would slide off.
Yeah.
You bring it to you, everything like jumps at you, right? So it's kind of like what we're doing in Gemara. We take two things and we say, okay, well, is this the same as that? Or in Halacha, a lot of times, you have the basic idea of the Gemara. So you have, the Mishnah told us salt. Now, salt is now our example of what we're working with. It might stand on its own sometimes, but it's what we're working with to say, okay, so where else would we apply the same thing about salt too? And that's what the Gemara comes along and does for us. Here, the Gemara spells it out for us. A lot of times, the Gemara doesn't necessarily spell it out. If I would tell you, if you learn Baba Kama, let's say, right? So you have different types of mazikin, things that cause damage that have slightly different halachas of how much you have to pay, how you have to pay, when you have to pay. So the Mishnah there speaks about an ox, a pit, if you dig a pit and someone falls in, a fire, and okay, whatever. Machloka is what the fourth one is, but two aspects of the ox, let's say. But those are the basic four. So you could be learning Baba Kama and learn all about their exact characteristics and what makes them their thing, and therefore which halachas would apply to which ones. And then I might ask you, okay, so if I put my car in neutral on the top of a hill, or I think I put it in a park, and it doesn't work so well, or I happen to put it in neutral and it rolls down the hill and smashes into someone else's car, what is that comparable to? Is that like my fire? Is that like my ox? I think in yeshivas, when everyone learns about one ox scoring another, everyone's like, so a car hits another car. It's like, they're not the same. At face value, those two things are not the same. So the Gemara didn't talk about cars. and we don't have oxen so much walking around, but it's still relevant because we still have to decide things that do come into play nowadays. What are they similar to?
Right.
And what halachas will we say that they will have the characteristics of, to how the halacha will come out? How do I pay you? What do I pay you for?
Do people make the argument of, because, say, let's use the ox, because people aren't just walking around with oxen nowadays, that you couldn't apply this to?
So some people might say, yeah, there's no reason to learn, let's say, Baba Kama and oxen because it's not relevant to our lives anymore. I would disagree.
What would you say to them?
This point that, no, you would have to learn it and see exactly what characteristics the Gemara is telling you, and then find similarities maybe in things that come up today. These things do come up. They're less common maybe than they used to be. But if you have a pet, I'm saying
Like
some
a
of those
dog.
things, yeah. And I think someone even told me he got a case. He was one of the judges on a Besdin, and someone's pet animal, I don't remember exactly, jumped into this guy's trunk and took one of his groceries and ate it. I'm not going to try to get into all the intricacies of the halacha right now, but like, is it a public domain? Is his trunk considered a private domain? Does he have to pay for that? I'm saying these things are prevalent. They do happen. They're not so common like they used to be. I'll give you that. But to say it's not relevant at all. To say they aren't relevant at all is not exactly true. And you would have to. It's not a simple thing. You won't be able to open up a Shulchan Aruch. You won't be able to open up a Gemara and find what is a car considered, or I don't. Where else would it come up? I'm not. But like, if I'm playing basketball, and the ball goes and well, I'm already doing it, so it's okay. It's different. But whatever it might be, I set something up that ends up damaging somebody. I have to go learn the Gemaras properly and come out with a real understanding of what's happening, and be able to apply it. So that's Gemara teaches you to go beyond just the facts given to you and extrapolate from that to other things maybe more relevant to your life, and then say, okay, what is this like? The same way that. How did poskim decide are you allowed to cook with a microwave on Shabbos, or is it considered basar v'chalav if you make a cheeseburger in the microwave? Is it considered you can't eat it even if it's not cooked?
Well, because it's not fire.
So
right?
what is
it's
it?
A different
so do we
way,
care
right?
that it's fire? Do we not care that it's fire? So we have to look at the
Isn't
Gemara.
that the whole thing? Like, could you cook an egg outside on a hot summer day with the sun?
Yeah.
On Shabbos.
Yeah, whatever. These are all discussions.
Yeah.
Cooking with the sun. So what is a microwave considered? So you have to go learn all the relevant, what we call sugyas, topic. The places in the Gemara where it discusses cooking with different maybe ways, like you're talking about the sun or cooking with something that heated up. What is a microwave exactly? Someone who decides halacha would have to obviously understand the mechanics to a microwave as well as just seeing it. He would have to understand what is the microwave doing that makes it cook the food, and decide the halacha based on that. Is it considered cooking? Obviously, again, you can't turn on the microwave on Shabbos either way, but would it be considered the malacha of what the Torah says that you're considered cooking on Shabbos or not would be the question that they're dealing with. Is it only a derabanan? Is it something that the Torah would say is asur? So we have to extrapolate from what we have in the Gemara to what is nowadays. We have a lot of Sfarim that do it for us, but this is a good example, like you pointed out, that salt is only there to show us how to then go ahead and decide the halacha as a whole.
Similar.
So Rebbe gives us a halacha, the Mishnah gives us a halacha, and now my job is to understand why that was used as like the example to bring out this bigger point, and now I have to understand the background to it, and then I have to understand where else to apply it to, and then from there I can go ahead and understand, let's say, the halacha and go further into it, so that someone can come and ask me a question about some random spice I never heard of, and maybe I'll call a guy who knows spices, or I'll ask him, does it lose flavor or not, or he'll have to tell me, and I'll be able to decide the halacha now that I have salt in the Mishnah based on what the Gemara gives us, depending on what Shulchan Aruch will say the halacha, what's concluded. Fine.
Shkoyach.
Okay. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
We'll do this again. No question about it.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.